All right, today we're diving into a Supreme Court decision that asks a really fundamental question. What is a home? I mean, really. This is a story about a tenant who's been somewhere for years, a brand new landlord, and a fight over one apartment that went, you guessed it, all the way to the Supreme Court. So let's get right into it. Okay, I want you to put yourself in this situation. Imagine you've lived in the same apartment for, say, 17 years. It's your home. All your memories are there. Then, boom, the building gets sold. The new owner comes to you and says, you gotta leave. And for what? So he can turn your home into a room for his driver? I mean, that just feels wrong, right? But the big question is it illegal? That's the exact dilemma we're looking at today. So to really get what's going on here, we have to meet the two people at the center of it all. Because this wasn't just some dry legal argument in a courtroom, no. This was a super personal fight between one guy who was about to lose the only home he'd known for ages and another guy just trying to make a home for his own big family. So in one corner, you've got Tony Caudal. He's been renting his apartment since 1967 on just a simple verbal month-to-month deal. And in the other corner, the new landlord, Dionisio Co. But here's the twist, and it's a good one. Co was a renter himself. His own lease was running out, he had a wife and 5 kids, and he was, desperate to find a permanent place for his family. That's why he bought the whole building in the first place. And things escalated fast. Take a look. February 1984, Co buys the building. Just a few months later, in July, he gives Caudal the official notice to vacate. The deadline is set for October. But October comes and goes, and Tony Caudal isn't going anywhere. He digs in his heels, refusing to leave the place he's called home for 17 years. And that, of course, is what forced the whole thing into the courts. Yeah, and this is where it stops being just a dispute between two people and turns into a total legal saga. I mean, this was not a simple open and shut case. Not at all. It literally bounced up and down the legal ladder with different courts looking at the exact same facts and coming to completely different decisions. Just check out this back and forth. First up, the Metropolitan Trial Court. They side with the tenant, Tony Caudal. Case dismissed. You'd think that's it, right? Nope. The landlord, Dionisio Co, appeals. It goes to the Regional Trial Court and, they completely flip the decision. Now the landlord is winning. So Caudal takes it to the Court of Appeals, and they just double down, siding with the landlord again. So you've got this legal whiplash, right? A real unresolved question of law. You have one court saying one thing and two higher courts saying the complete opposite. When that happens, there's only one place left to go for a final answer. The stage was set for the Supreme Court to weigh in. So think about this. After all these years, all these court battles, this entire complicated emotional mess, it all boiled down to the meaning of just one word. The single question for the Supreme Court was, what does the law actually mean by residential use? Okay, so this is the actual text from the law they were all arguing about. It basically says a landlord can repossess their property if they have a legitimate need to use it for themselves or their immediate family as a residential unit. And everything, absolutely everything, hung on how you define those two little words, residential unit. And this is where we get to the heart of Tony Caudal's argument. His whole point was that the landlord's plan, using the apartment as a stockroom and a place for maids and drivers, was not a residential unit as the law intended. He's saying, hey, maids and drivers aren't immediate family. Therefore, this isn't a valid reason to kick me out. All right, so how did the Supreme Court tackle this? How did they untangle this legal knot? Well, they were pretty smart about it. They didn't just stare at that one single phrase. Instead, they kind of zoomed out and looked at the entire law to figure out, okay, what did the people who wrote this law actually mean? And they found their answer in a kind of surprising place, a completely different section of the same law. It turns out the law itself defines a residential unit as a place for dwelling. But it also says it can include things like home businesses or little retail stores, as long as the family actually lives there. And that little detail was a game changer. It showed the court that the term was meant to be flexible. So you can see the two very different ways of looking at this. You have Caudal's argument, which is super narrow. Residential means only the family lives there, period. But the court's logic was much broader. They basically said, wait a minute, if the law is okay with someone running a small store out of their house, why on earth would it forbid having a room for the staff who help run the household? It just didn't make sense. You had to look at the landlord's plan as a whole. And this one line from the ruling really sums it all up. The court said, a servant's quarter is an auxiliary part of a residence. Auxiliary, meaning it's a supporting part. It's not some separate business, it's just a piece of the main home. And with that one sentence, poof, the tenant's entire argument kind of fell apart.
But here's the real clincher. The court made it super clear that this apartment wasn't just going to be some isolated staff house. No, the landlord's plan was to physically combine several of the apartment units, including the one in question, into one big family home. So that room for the driver, it was just one piece of a much bigger residential puzzle.
So, okay, this case happened a while ago. What does it all mean for landlords and tenants today? What's the lasting impact? Let's break down the big ideas that came out of this ruling. First off, it's really important to know that the law has a built-in protection against landlords who might try to game the system. If a landlord kicks a tenant out for personal use, they are not allowed to re-rent that same unit for at least 1 full year. This is to make sure the reason is legit, that they really need it for their family, and it's not just a sneaky way to jack up for rent for someone new. So, let's wrap up with the key takeaways here. First, residential use is a broad term. It can include support spaces like staff quarters. Second, the owner's big picture plan is what really matters. Third, and this is a big one, a new owner's need for a family home can in fact take precedence over a tenant's long-term stay. And finally, even a simple verbal month-to-month lease isn't forever. It can be terminated as long as you give proper notice. So, at the end of the day, the Supreme Court's final word was crystal clear. They affirmed the lower court's decision and sided with the landlord, Dionisio Caudal. After that long, winding road through the legal system, he finally had the right to ask Tony Caudal to leave so that he could build a home for his own family. And this whole case leaves us with a really tough question, one that goes way beyond this specific story. You have one person's fundamental need for a home clashing with another person's right to their own property. It really makes you think. In this constant balancing act between the rights of a tenant and the rights of a landlord, how does the law find the right balance? How do we make sure it's not just following the letter of the law, but that it's actually just?